Welcome to the Crystal Library, a pocket-sized portal into the magical, mysterious, and sometimes misunderstood world of crystals. I'm your host, Ashley, and each week I'll guide you as we explore one enchanting stone, its history, lore, healing properties, and one easy way to invite its magic into your everyday life. Whether you're crystal curious or deep in the woo, this is your space to learn, explore, and expand your connection to the mineral realm, one glittering gem at a time. So let's open the library and see which crystal wants to speak today. Welcome back to the Crystal Library. I'm Ashley, and I'm so happy that you're here with me today. I have a very interesting stone to share with you all again this week that I'm very excited about. But before we get into it, I just want to say, you guys, I am someone, this has nothing to do with anything. I'm just going to start this by saying, this has nothing to do with the crystals. But I just want to say thank you to everyone that reached out to me regarding the beginning part of my Larimar episode, where I was just sharing about some feelings that I've been having and just some different things that I've been going through on a personal level. And honestly, the response that I got to that part of the episode was so lovely. People were finding me through Instagram, through my Substack, through YouTube, all these different places, and just sharing with me that they connected with what I said. And that means so much. I knew that I couldn't be alone in some of the feelings that I was having. And I just appreciate everything that everyone said. And I knew that if I'm experiencing these things, other people have to be experiencing things. Most of the things that we experience in our lifetime, we are not the only person on the earth that has ever had that happen to them or goes through that in real time. So thank you so much. And let's get into today's episode. You know me, I'm always stumbling over my own words. Maybe it's because I'm trying to talk too fast or I get too excited or whatever is going on with me. But anyway, so today's stone is a little different for me because I'm not working with a physical piece of it. I'm working with its spirit in real time as a part of a course I'm currently getting certified in. So that course, which I've mentioned briefly, is called, it's an Akashic Crystal Healing course. And it's something that I'm going to be offering as a personal service coming soon once I'm finished with my certification. And Danburite is required curriculum in the course. Every student works with this stone specifically. And it wasn't until I sat down to research this episode that I actually understood why this stone is required for the course. So let's start with what this stone actually is. So Danburite is a calcium borosilicate, a mineral built from calcium, boron, and silicon, crystallizing in a orthorhombic structure that gives it a distinctive wedge-shaped termination, close in clarity and brilliance to topaz. It was first identified in 1839 in Danbury, Connecticut, by the mineralogist Charles Shepard. That's why it's called Danburite. Most fine specimens today come out of Mexico. So that's the whole recorded history of this stone. This stone doesn't have a lost civilization. There's no ancient temples. There's no 1,000-year lineage of human use. But the stone itself isn't young. It's formed in the way that it always has, in hydrothermal veins deep underground, long before anyone had a name for it. What's young is our knowledge of it. Humanity only found the door to this stone a couple hundred years ago in a discipline that usually reaches for stones people have known about for millennia, which is part of why it fits where we are at this season, in this season of the veil. So every stone this season has sat on some kind of boundary, the line between what's known and what's hidden, what's provable, what's felt, what's on this side of ordinary awareness and what isn't. Danburite doesn't have an ancient story to draw that boundary for us. It draws it in a different way. Almost everything written about this stone across very different traditions describes it doing the same specific thing, moving you across a threshold you can't cross on your own. It's not a comforting stone. It's not a grounding stone particularly. It's a movement stone. It moves you through something. And I think that is what makes the stone so fascinating and a big reason why it is used in the course that I'm currently taking. So I personally do not own a piece of Danburite. I haven't been able to find one yet. So I was at the San Francisco Crystal Fair. I was sure I was going to be able to find a piece there. No. And it's a stone that I want to connect with before I actually purchase it. So it's hard for me to just want to get online and buy a piece. So in the journey work for this course that I'm taking, while probably all the other students are likely holding a physical stone, I'm working with the spirit of this stone instead, which is sort of my own adaptation. It's not how the practice is formally taught, but sometimes we just have to do what we can with what we have, right? We don't want to always let the lack of something stop us from pursuing what we are pursuing. And I think that is another big part of the stone. So here's the strange part for me. This still does something very specific for me when I'm working with its spirit. It takes me deeper into the specific meditations that we do. It takes me deeper into the Akashic Records themselves. It actually gets me there faster than some of the other stones that I've been working with. My vibration rises quicker with this one. And that happens pretty much every time without even holding the stone. It's just by channeling the spirit of the stone. And this is something new for me. I've never really worked with a crystal spirit before. And I'm a student in this course. Right. So I don't have years of history with Danburite the way that I do with some other stones like clear quartz, for example. But the one thing, the speed, the depth, every single time with no physical stone in hand, it was consistent enough that I started researching this stone for the show. And I had a real question to bring to it. Why would this particular stone do that for me without ever touching it? So that is the question that set me into the research. And the research definitely answered the question. So here's what set me down this path. So when I started pulling together every source that I have that talks about Danburite, what I expected was the usual scatter of information from the different authors that have written these texts in different decades with different vocabulary. And a lot of times these different texts have like similar claims, generic claims that are kind of copied and forwarded through all the different texts. And that's not what I found with this stone. What I found instead was several sources spanning decades and different methods, all describing Danburite doing the same specific thing, but in different words. So let's start with Judy Hall. Judy Hall, most people in the crystal world are very familiar with Judy Hall. She wrote the Crystal Bible, which is kind of at the center of my whole crystal research library, right? Hall describes Danburite as a karmic cleanser, a stone that releases what she calls miasms or old patterns carried forward that aren't fully yours anymore. She writes that it starts the soul off in a new direction and that it can even sit at someone's bedside to support a conscious spiritual transition at the end of life. Spiritually, she ties it to the crown chakra and what she calls the higher crown chakras, which are access points in her framework that sit above ordinary awareness entirely. Now, let's go back further to Melody. Melody had a very foundational book in 1995 called Love is in the Earth. And it was a very foundational text in the crystal healing field. Melody describes Danburite as an intellectual activator, a stone that helps you, in her words, let your light shine. But the detail that stopped me is what she calls the Buddha crystal, a specific formation Danburite occasionally grows into, which she says intensifies every one of the stone's properties toward enlightenment and the realization of one's path. Not every piece of Danburite forms this way. The ones that do are treated in her tradition as carrying something more concentrated. And then there's also the perspective of Athena Perrakis, who wrote Crystalpedia, which is a big part of my library. Perrakis places Danburite inside something called the Synergy 12. This was new to me. A recognized set of 12 stones the crystal community treats as unusually high vibration. They're specifically associated with light body activation, which is the idea that alongside your physical body, you're carrying a subtler energetic body, sometimes called the light body, and that certain practices, or in this case, certain stones, can wake it up and let more of your consciousness move through it. It's a specific named category. It's not a loose description. Inside that category, Perrakis calls Danburite the psychic surgeon. A stone, she says, identifies the root of pain and removes what's blocking you from your path, and names it alongside Melody's language, the stone of enlightenment. Okay. And now we will get to Krista Mitchell, who is my teacher currently. In the course I'm currently taking in her Akashic Crystal Healing curriculum, Danburite is used for the specific purpose of opening and accessing the Akashic Records themselves. It's not a stone that just generally supports the work, it really opens the work. So when you line those 4 sources up and look at what's actually being said, you see a karmic cleanser that starts the soul on a new direction, a crystal formation named for enlightenment itself, a member of a small named category of stones specifically tied to higher consciousness access, a key that opens the Akashic Records. So you have 4 sources, 4 different vocabularies, and every one of them is describing the same motion. And it's not all about comfort and grounding. It's about that crossing the threshold. And I just found that so fascinating when I was putting all of it together, because this is really where it clicked for me. Okay. And that's what I love about doing these episodes, because it's always like I read through everything. And then it's like there's always some path that really lines everything together. And I'm like, okay, this is it. Danburite isn't required curriculum in this course because it's a generically powerful stone. The way half of what gets written about crystals treats every stone as some version of like high vibration, right? It is required because it's one of a small, specifically named set of stones, the Synergy 12, that the wider tradition already treats as doorway stones. Stones built specifically for the work of activating the light body and reaching higher consciousness. Akashic Record access is exactly that kind of doorway. I didn't know that when I started this course. I just knew the assignment was Danburite, among other crystals, okay? It was not just specifically this one. And I did the research. I did the work. It wasn't until I sat down to research this episode that I saw the actual mechanism behind why my teacher chose this stone for this specific purpose. She didn't pick it up randomly, and she didn't have to explain her reasoning behind the stone for it to be sound. The reasoning was already sitting in the tradition. It was just waiting for me to find it. Okay, because in this course, like the specific stones that she recommends for us to work with, she doesn't necessarily lay out exactly why. And I've been doing this work with the Akashic Records in this course for weeks without knowing any of this, and now I do. So it's like one of those things. It's like once you know it, you can't ever unsee it. So now I'm like, oh, okay, I can really understand where the power of this stone lies. And here's what I keep coming back to. I don't know whether these 4 individuals ever read each other's work. I mean, I imagine some of them did, of course. Judy Hall might have drawn on Melody's work. Krista Mitchell probably has studied all of these people's works, but I don't know that directly, right? What I do know is that these 4 different sources spanning multiple decades and different methods, these are all kind of pointing at the same thing about this one stone. And it's interesting to me how that works. And I find it makes it so much easier to understand these crystals when all the sources kind of lead back to the same thing. So there are a few ways to hold all this information. One is that something real is sitting inside this stone, and different traditions working with their own framework and their own language are each picking up on it. You have a karmic cleanser, an enlightenment formation, a doorway stone, a key to the Akashic Records. Different words pointed at the same door, essentially. So another is that this is what happens when enough people over time sit with the same physical object with the same kind of intention, right? Clear, cool, quietly brilliant, harder than it looks. And something about paying that kind of attention to anything consistently produces convergent insight regardless of the object. So I'm not going to tell you which of all of this is true. I don't think I have to. What I notice is that both of these possibilities point the same direction. Something moves when people work with this stone in this way, across sources, whether or not they were reading each other. Whether the Danburite is doing it, or whether the attention is doing it, or whether, and this is the one I actually think is likely, as those two things were never as separable as we want them to be. The veil doesn't move because you understand it. It moves because something on your side of it reaches for something on the other side consistently enough that eventually the door opens. So, I have to say, to close things up, Danburite has big crystal energy because it doesn't have to be held to open a door. And that's all I have for you this week. So enjoy. If you guys know a source to get really quality Danburite, and it's a reputable source, I would be very interested to know. So please DM me, because as much as I enjoy channeling the spirit of this stone and working with it in a spiritual sense, I really want a piece of it for my own collection. So hit me up if you know. And on that note, bye. Thank you for visiting the Crystal Library. I hope today's stone offered just the magic you needed. If you loved this episode, share it with your favorite mystic and tag me on Instagram at mystical.